Hi, today we're going to talk about the first part of the second section of Module 2. As you remember, we are solving quadratic functions, which means that we're actually trying to find what place the graph crosses the x-axis. We already talked about how to do it with graphing, and there were a couple of worksheets and some student written notes in your section. I think you should find it really easy to follow. But this second section talks about how to find the solutions using factoring. And factoring is something you learned in Algebra 1, but it might be something that you need a refresher on. So this is the first part of the factoring section. We're going to just go through the first basic type of factoring. First of all, remember when you're factoring something, you're trying to figure out what it is that you multiply together to get that quadratic. So we're kind of going backwards through a multiplication problem. First of all, remember that every quadratic is written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. And when we're solving it, we want it to be an equation, so we set it equal to 0. If the problem is not set equal to 0, then you have to set it equal to 0 before you get started on it. There are a couple of steps to the factoring process. The first one is to factor out the GCF. And you remember that that means greatest common factor. That means you're looking for the one item, and it might be a number, it might be a letter, or it might be both. But one item that can be in reality just divided into every term in the quadratic. So let's take a look at an example so you can see what we're talking about. Let's say, for example, I had the problem 3x squared plus 9x minus 12 equals 0. Well, if you take a look at that, you can see the numbers 3 and 9 and 12. All three of those can be divided by 3. So what we do is we write that 3 down because we can divide by it, and then we divide every number by 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. We don't need to write the x or the 1 down, but we have x squared left. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and 12 divided by 3 is 4 equals 0. We're not actually done with that problem factoring, but that's what we would do if we wanted to do a greatest common factor. Let's try another one, a little bit more complicated, just to show you that it's not always just a number. Let's do 8x to the third minus 16x squared plus 24x, and we set it equal to 0 also. Well, if you take a look at this, because there are letters in every term, you're going to separate the numbers from the letters. So what number goes into 8, 16, and 24? Well, there are a bunch of them, but we want the biggest one. And the biggest number that will go into all three is the number 8. Now you look at the letters. And the easiest way to do this from a layman's perspective is look at the smallest exponent of that common letter. There's a common x in all three terms. And the smallest exponent that you see, 3, 2, 1, the smallest one is 1. So we put x to the first power out there. And then when we do the factoring out, we actually divide by the number, and then we subtract the exponents. So 8 divided by 8 is 1. Subtract the exponents. 3 minus 1 is 2. Negative 16 divided by 8 is negative 2. Subtract the exponents. 2 minus 1 is 1. And then positive 24 divided by 8 is positive 3. And when you subtract the exponents, 1 minus 1, that term is gone. And you're done. Now, just as a little hint, if this number right here had been an 8, let's just change it for a second. If that had been an 8, 8 divided by 8 is 1. We're so used to saying, well, we don't need to write down the 1. But when the x's are gone, because 1 minus 1 is 0, I can't leave this spot blank. So I have to put the 1 there. You don't have to put the x because the x doesn't have an exponent anymore, but you do have to put the 1. So that's the first step you're going to do when you're factoring. You can't always take a greatest common factor out, but if you can, then you have to. Now the second one, the second part of it is when we're actually going to be doing our factoring. And we're going to do this second step in 2 parts. The first part is the only one we're going to do today. The first part is when a is 1, when this number up here is 1. So when the a is 1, the problem really turns out to look like this: x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So the only numbers we'll have in our problem will be b and c. So if we're going to factor something that's in that form, we actually ask ourselves or tell ourselves that we're going to be looking for some couple of things. So we're going to write it down in sentence form. I want 2 numbers crammed it in there, whose, and I'm going to write this in a different color because it's an important piece of information, whose product and remember, product means multiplication. So whose product is, and this is important also, C, this number right here. So we're going to start off with, we're looking for 2 numbers whose product is C. And then and whose, and here's another requirement, sum or difference is B. So looking at the beginning, the 2 numbers that I pick have to multiply, that's what product is, have to multiply to give me this number right here. And then they either have to add or subtract, have a sum or a difference of this number right here. Now the first question most kids ask is, okay, great. Are they going to add or are they going to subtract? Well, that depends on this sign right here. If that sign is a plus, then we're adding them. If that sign is a minus, then we're going to subtract them. We do not care when we're picking out the numbers to start with. We do not care what this sign is. When we actually go to write our final answer, then we'll look at that sign. We'll use common sense to figure out what the answer is after we look at that sign. So we're not going to turn it into a big problem. So we're looking for 2 numbers that multiply together to get the C, and then they will add together to get the B if that says plus, or we'll subtract them to get the B if that says minus. So let's look at an example. Now let me put the rule back up at the top here to make it a little easier. 2 numbers, and I'll cut it down a little bit. 2 numbers, product is C, and then sum or difference is B. So here we go. Let's take a look at an example. Let's do x squared plus, let's go 7x plus 10 equals 0. This is B right here, and this is C. And this is plus, so it's going to be a sum. So I want two numbers whose product is C. So I want two numbers that multiply together to get 10. Some of you will be able to squirrel it away in the back of your head. Some of you will need to write them down. So let's just write them down just to get used to it. I need two numbers that multiply to get 10. Well, 1 and 10, 2 and 5. We don't care about whether it's positive 10 or negative 10. We just want it to be a 10. And then it's a sum because that's a plus sign. So the two numbers that I pick have to add together to get B. So they have to add together to get 7. Well, out of these two choices here, the two that add together to get 7 are these two. So we're going to write our answer. You start with two sets of parentheses. We put x's in because x times x is x squared. Now put the two numbers in you picked, and it doesn't matter which one goes where. Don't put any signs in, just put the numbers in. Now this is where we're going to use some common sense. We said we were going to add them. And when you add, the signs are the same. So we're adding two positives or we're adding two negatives. Well, we want to get positive 7 when we add. Well, the only way you can get positive 7 when you add those two numbers is if they are both positive. If they were both negative, you would not get positive 7 when you added them. And then you're done. We're not finished with the problem. We don't have the answer to the problem, but that's what you do when you factor. Let's try another one. X squared minus 8x plus 15 equals 0. Okay, again, this is the B, this is the C, this is a plus, so we're going to add. So I want two numbers whose product is C, two numbers that multiply to get 15. Well, the only numbers that multiply to get 15 are 1 and 15 or 3 and 5. Now we do the second part. They have to add or subtract to get the B. Well, because this is a plus, they have to add. So the two numbers I pick have to add to get 8. Well, out of these two choices, the only two that add together to get 8 are 3 and 5. So we write our answer. Put the x's in because x times x is x squared. Put the two numbers in that you picked. And now we use common sense. We have to add. So we're going to add two positives or two negatives. I want to get a -8. So would I add 2 positives to get a -8, or would I add 2 negatives? And the answer is I would add 2 negatives. Okay, another example. Make this one a little bit more complicated. Let's do x squared plus 10x minus 24. Again, this is the B, this is the C, but now this is a minus sign. So we're going to do a difference. We're going to subtract. Once we pick our two numbers or we look at our choices, we're going to subtract them instead of adding like the last ones. So here we go. I want two numbers whose product is C. I want two numbers whose product is 24. Well, there are a bunch of them. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 6 and 4. I think that's it. We don't have to flip the options around. We don't have to do 12 and 2 and 8 and 3. We just have to write down one combination. Okay, we want two numbers whose product is 24, so here's our choices. But now we want to be able to subtract them to get 10. I want to subtract these numbers, take the big one minus the little one, and see which one gives us 10. Well, when you subtract 12 and 2, you get 10. Now, some of you may look at the 6 and the 4 and you say, well, that'll give you 10. It will give you 10, but not if you subtract them. It will give you 10 if you add them. We don't want to add them. So now we're going to write our answer. Again, put the x's in, put your numbers in, and again, it doesn't matter whether you put the 2 first and then the 12 or the other way around. Now this is where you again use common sense. Remember on the earlier problems, we said that if this was adding, then we wanted 2 positives or 2 negatives. But when you subtract, you have to have different signs. Like if I have 5 minus 3, the 5 is positive and the 3 is negative. If I have 15 minus 2, it's positive 15 and a negative 2. Well, the same thing is true here. One of these is going to be positive and one's going to be negative. So if I say that I want to subtract them to get 10, the question is, and I want to get a positive 10, the question is, do I go 2 subtract 12? Will that give me a positive 10? Or do I need to go 12 subtract 2? Well, if I want to get a positive 10, I have to go 12 subtract 2. And there's my answer. One more. Let's go x squared minus 7x minus 30. Okay, we want two numbers whose product is 30. And again, if you need to, write this down. This is the B, this is the C, this is a subtraction. So we are going to subtract our two numbers. So I need two numbers whose product is C, two numbers that multiply to get 30. Again, ignore this sign right now. I just want to get 30. So I could do 1 and 30, I could do 2 and 15. I could do 3 and 10. I could do 6 and 5. So all of those are possible answers because all of them multiply to get 30. Now we're going to narrow it down. My two numbers have a product of 30 and they must subtract, because that's a minus, they must subtract to get 7. So I want the ones in here that subtract to get 7. And as a matter of fact, there will only be one answer. Actually, you may run into a situation where none of them work, but you're never going to get a situation where 2 of them work. So the ones that subtract to get 7 are these 2 right here. Again, don't pay attention to that sign when we're trying to figure out which 2 to circle. Don't pay attention to this, not yet. So let's go to write our answer down. Again, put the X's in, put your numbers in. Now, we have to subtract them. And we want to get a -7 when we subtract. So, does 3 minus 10 give you -7? Or is it 10 minus 3? Well, it is 3 minus 10. 3 minus 10. When you just have a number and there's nothing, you didn't put a sign in front of it, it's always positive. So 3 minus 10. The 3 is positive, the 10 is negative, and there's your answer. All right, that takes you through the first category of factoring. And after class on Wednesday, we'll go over the second category, which is what happens when the A number is not 1, if it's bigger than 1. And those problems just require one more step. So you now know how to take out greatest common factors, and you now know how to do the basic simple factoring. Sometimes you can do both. Sometimes you'll have a greatest common factor and it'll be a simple factoring problem. Go into your dashboard, find the student written notes over the second section of Module 2, which is solving quadratic functions using factoring. Look at those student notes and also look at the material in the module. You do not have to do either one of the quizzes, the first or the second quiz in Module 2, not yet. But after Wednesday, you'll be doing the quizzes and you'll be doing the basic simple factoring worksheet that's there.